Wonderful. Good afternoon and welcome to our Canada Disability Benefit Q&A. Oh, sorry, I'm not allowed to minimize the screen while I'm recording, so I have to start over. Good afternoon and welcome to our Canada Disability Benefit Q&A with MP Mike Morrice. A huge thank you to Mike for being here to answer our questions, and the folks at KWA for hosting the in-person portion of our event. I'm so sorry, I'm just going to make someone else a co-host so I can do the introduction and somebody else can continue to let folks in. So give me 1 second.
Make me a co-host, sure.
Yep, thank you. Oh, sorry, we have such a long list. It's amazing. There's so many people here. There you are, Dan. Okay, perfect. We'll continue. MP Mike Morrice has spent his career bringing people together, whether working with different levels of government or not-for-profit organizations. Mike has a proven record of introducing ambitious ideas, along with finding the funds to pay for them. Mike is inspired by the great things that people can accomplish when we genuinely listen to one another, when we look to find common ground, and we prioritize future generations. In 2019, Mike was the Kitchener Centre's Green Party candidate for Member of Parliament, increasing the Green vote from 3% to 26%, the strongest result of any Green candidate in Ontario, Quebec, and the Prairies. He ran again in 2021, winning the riding along with the title of Ontario's first elected Green MP. Since being elected, Mike has worked to address wealth inequality through dedicated advocacy for the Canada Disability Benefit and to improve housing affordability through his private members Motion 71, which would end tax exemptions enjoyed by corporate investors. On the Canada Disability Benefit specifically, Mike has sponsored a petition in November 2021, which he later presented in the House of Commons with close to 18,000 signatures. He's coordinated a cross-party letter of support co-signed by 79 MPs. He hosted a parliamentary reception alongside national advocates called Disability Without Poverty, in October of 2022, the day before the Canada Disability Act passed second reading. He's provided 5 of the 9 amendments that were ultimately accepted to strengthen the disability benefit. And he continues to advocate for the benefit to be funded in the budget of 2023. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can either use the raise hand option if you're joining us virtually. You can type your question in the chat, or you can just speak up and let us know that you have a question. So on that, I'm going to let Mike take it from here. Take it away, Mike.
Oh, thanks so much, Sherry. It is so nice to be with you all here in person and with so many folks online as well. I want to start by acknowledging for those of us that are here in person at KW Accessibility, we're here today on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the neutral peoples. This was land that was promised to the Six Nations in 1784. And the majority of this land is known as the Haldimand Tract, 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. We're in a portion of that area called Block 2. And the majority of it has never been paid for or paid to Six Nations. And so for those of you joining us online, I'd encourage you to understand the traditional territory that you're on, as we all consider and are informed by this in our work as we work towards meaningful truth and then reconciliation. Now, the only reason we're here today is because of some really wonderful people. So I want to start by thanking you, Sherry, from the Independent Living Center of Waterloo Region, as well as Edward and the team at KW Accessibility. This is pretty neat that we have both people online joining us and in person so that you can have your voices heard in the advocacy that we're doing together, and ultimately your questions answered, because this work is about serving the disability community in our community and across the country. Something though that I have seen from the disability community across the country is an ease in collaborating and working together. And so I also want to recognize we've got several other organizations who helped invite folks to be with us here in person and online, and who've also joined us. So in addition to Sherry and the team at ILWR, in addition to Edward and the team at KW Accessibility, Al Mills is with us from Extend a Family. And we also have folks, I believe, from the Canadian Hearing Society that have joined us online also. And so thanks to all of those organizations. There may be a few others with us as well who've helped to let those that they serve know about this. I also see Councillor Huinik from Christian Horizons is with us as well. Councillor, wonderful to have you with us.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
It's really special knowing we're seeing increasingly diverse voices at the table, particularly in elected office across our community, and then also continuing to join for conversations like these. And so you heard in Sherry's opening some of the work we've done to bring the Canada Disability Benefit to life. I want you all to know the reason we're doing this work is because of a collective sense of anger and disappointment in legislated poverty as it exists in our country right now. That we know it's not right, that 40% of those living in poverty are those living with disabilities. And that it doesn't have to be that way. And that it's through legislation that we change that. And so the Canada Disability Benefit will be a supplement that will be in addition to what territories and provinces across the country currently offer. And so for those of you in Ontario, in our community, for example, this would be in addition to the Ontario Disability Support Program, recognizing that ODSP is insufficient on its own. There's not a livable amount, that the shelter allowance, for example, doesn't afford a single apartment in our community. And that's why long before I ever got elected, it was disability advocates that got the disability benefit on the table to begin with. And for my part, I've been seeking to ensure in Parliament that it is advanced. And there's been three main pieces of work in that regard. The first is to say, you need to go and get this done as quickly as possible. The second is you need to improve so that the bill is as strong as possible. And third, you need to fund it so that a person with a disability can count on this supplement in their bank account as soon as possible. On each of those tracks, it's been groups like Disability Without Poverty, like Extend a Family, like KW Accessibility that have been advancing this conversation. And it's really thanks to them, you know, that petition that was mentioned, 18,000 people signed it. You only need 500 people to sign a petition for it to be presented. And so part of the reason the government responded in introducing this legislation is they saw the momentum that we built and that really you built. When I say you, I mean disability advocates right across the country who've been saying enough is enough. And so I can share more about any of those things, but we really wanted this to be about answering your questions. And so I think I'm going to pause there to open it up. Some of you might want to know more about how we changed the bill, or who's going to be eligible, or when is it, all these questions. I might not have all the answers, but I can at least let you know where things currently stand and what work needs to continue to be done in order to have the benefit in place. So I'll pause there. We'll shift to questions. I think what we'll try to do is switch between one in person and then one online and just kind of go back and forth.
Yep, so we have a couple questions here online. First up, Chantel, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Sherry. As it stands now, prior to the implementation of the Canada Disability Benefit, there are some subsidies within our community that you're guaranteed eligibility through if you are an ODSP recipient, because there's an understanding there that that's lower. I understand that with the Canada Disability Benefit, the inequity or the need for subsidies, shall we say, will be reduced. But I'm wondering if you've thought about or talked about ways to safeguard some of the community-oriented subsidies that may disappear once the Canada Disability Benefit is implemented.
Absolutely. Chantal, it's such an important question. I'm glad you're starting us with this. The way I often hear it from the disability community is no clawbacks. Don't take back anything that's currently the insufficient amounts that are currently being provided. If you're going to add to it, let's ensure that government is actually adding without taking anything away. This was one of the 12 principles that Disability Without Poverty put forward in the initial conversations on this benefit. And the disability community has brought it up every step of the way. One of the challenges with this being a federal bill is that in the legislation, the federal government can't tell the provinces what to do. And so the work we need to do is ensure that in the federal government's negotiations with provinces and territories, that they put that stipulation in those agreements. Because some of the benefits that Chantal is referring to, like the disability tax credit, is federal. But many of them, like ODSP, are provincial. One assurance we did get in the federal bill, this was one of the amendments that I was successful in bringing forward from the disability community, is a requirement that those negotiations and the agreements that the province of Ontario, for example, will have with the federal government, that is going to be required to be a public document. I believe that government can do good. I believe in the power of government to serve our communities. Part of building that trust in government, though, is in having transparency and ensuring that the agreements that are negotiated on your behalf, on the disability community's behalf, there should be some accountability to the disability community. And so you will see those agreements once they're negotiated. They haven't been yet. The federal government is telling us they want to pass the legislation first, and then they're going to enter into negotiations. And so the most honest answer to the question is, we do not have the assurance yet, but your voices have been heard to put as much as is possible in the federal legislation. And we're being told right to the Minister of Disabilities and Inclusion that it is their intention to ensure there are no clawbacks to any other programs of financial support to people with disabilities across the country. But the work doesn't end here. We're going to need to continue to advocate every step of the way. One of the other amendments we got passed is in some of the decisions that will be made over the next year, there's a requirement in the law that people with disabilities will be at the table throughout, so that that question continues to be asked and pressed upon as we move along. We'll switch to a question in person.
Yes, I'm Ron Fleming. I'm with Executive Accessibility. We've met before in Victoria Park, I believe. At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned essentially native land claims, but you were actually more specific about it than many people are when they talk about these things in general terms and euphemisms. You made reference to promises, which is a very concrete thing. You also mentioned that the disability with poverty business was on the scene even before you came on the scene. So in other words, it goes back some years. To me, these things, including such things as no clawbacks, seem like no-brainers. So I'm asking if you would make any comment, or it may involve some degree of speculation, you may not wish to do that, but do you have any thoughts as to why these things, which would seem to be no-brainers, take so long?
So the question from Ron at KW Accessibility was, recognizing this has been promised for 7 years. And it's kind of obvious that people with disabilities deserve a dignified life. Why is it that it's taken so long to get to this point?
Yes. Oh, that's a good summation of my question, yes.
Thanks, Ron. And I share it back just to make sure that those who are online are hearing as well. And I should pause to say thank you to our 2 ASL interpreters, both Lisa and Amina have been interpreting throughout. Thank you to you both for your work. Ron, if I had the answer to that question, we would have won the benefit 7 years ago. I don't have the answer. What I do know, though, is that it only happens when we organize and when we apply pressure. There are many other promises I'm sure you can all think of that government have made at various levels that they haven't followed through on. When we win the disability benefit, it's going to be as a result of disability advocates across the country who've said, we're not going to let you forget about this promise you made. And we expect you to follow through, and we're going to continue applying pressure on you following through the way you promised you would 7 years ago. And as a result of that, it's going to happen faster than it otherwise would. The benefit most recently was in legislation before the last election. The only reason the federal government brought it back as quickly as they did was because disability advocates across the country every day were pressing, we're writing letters and sending emails and online, and all of that added up. And so while I'm disappointed that it's taken this long, and I don't have a crystal ball on exactly when it's going to be in place, I know it'll go faster the more we apply pressure. I'll give you one specific example, Ron, because you mentioned you wanted specifics. In the bill, one of the things we had added is not only do we need this legislation, the law passed, but then various decisions need to be made in regulations that come afterwards. It's a whole additional step. One of the things we had added to the law is that additional step on regulations can take no more than 1 year. So those are the kinds of ways that we can force their hand to say you can't. One of the big concerns, if I'm honest with you, many from the disability community are saying, are you going to not do this until the next election? And I have another promise. One of the hopes with this change to force them to regulate within a year is that it gives us the best chance possible that the benefit will be in place before the next election.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You bet.
So Mike.
Yeah, we'll
Sherry's
switch now
speaking
to a
here.
question online and over to you.
Yeah. So I'm loving the thorough answers you're giving, but we have a ton of questions, so I'm worried we're gonna run out of time. So yeah, if we can try and keep it as succinct as possible, awesome. Thank you so much. So we are gonna take a question from the chat. We've got quite a few in here. Let me get to the top here.
Yep. So sure.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Did you want me to read them?
Sure, yeah, if you have it in order, that'd be great.
Yeah, I do. So the first question is, hi, by the way, I'm Dan. The first question is, if I work full time, does that mean I'll be turned down for the CDB?
A great question. So the eligibility, so who will access the disability benefit is one of the decisions that's being left to regulations. So we don't have the answer to that question yet. Many advocates are pushing to ensure that whatever the disability benefit is, that it lifts every person with a disability at least above the official poverty line, wherever in the country they might be. So the hope would be that if someone, and as you know, in Ontario, for example, the clawback on earned income has gone up to $1,000 now. So the hope would be, and this is not assured, but what we're going to press for is that any existing benefit and earned income, if it is less than the official poverty line, then the Canada Disability Benefit you would be eligible for and would lift above that amount.
Perfect, thank you. Did we want to take, so I guess Lorna, you're up next if you want to ask a question live there.
Okay, thank you. Just a two-part question. I wanted to find out, Mike, if you could identify any current stumbling blocks. I understand it's before the Senate right now. I've read a little bit about that. And also the second part is, can you make any suggestions of what we can do to help get past the stumbling blocks?
Lorna, it's one of the ways you're such a good advocate is you ask the questions that need to be asked. So yes, first of all, Lorna is right. Right now, the bill is with the Senate. So any law has to pass the elected House of Commons, then pass the unelected Senate, then it goes into regulations. The most helpful thing that can be done right now in terms of advocacy is not only do we need a law, we need money in budgets for the disability benefit. And so an encouragement that groups like Lead Now and Disability Without Poverty in my office and others in the disability community have been pushing for is to specifically push elected MPs to fund the benefit in this year's budget. And so for those of you who don't live in Kitchener Center, for example, and you want to email your MP, in fact, you can email me as well. I'd be glad to hear. There's only more affirmation to continue the push. Your MP's email address is their first name, a period, their last name, the @ symbol, PARL, as in Parliament, another period, the letters GC, as in Government of Canada, another period, CA. For those online, Roz has put it in the chat for you there. Emailing your MP to tell them why you feel the Canada Disability Benefit is so important and that you want them to push for the finance minister to fund the benefit in budget 2023 is a critical point of advocacy that I asked the Prime Minister about it just before the holidays again and received no answer. So we know they aren't committed to funding it in this year's budget yet. We need to continue to push them for that.
Sherry, it's Jay.
Can we switch to an in-person, Sherry? Is that okay?
Yeah, we're going to ask one question in person and then we got a couple before you, Jay, but you will get a chance to ask a question, I promise.
Okay,
I just need the phone number.
and then we'll go. Did you still have a question?
I know mine was already.
Great. Okay, awesome. Then we can go here.
Okay. As we know, we have the federal government on disability pension. Now, is this going to interfere with any federal subsidy? Because as we all know, if you have any disability pension, the clawback on from ODSP has affected. So basically, if you're on Canada pension, that's your first amount. ODSP is very little. Now, the new CDP goes on top of that, or how did that work?
And can I ask your name?
Name is James.
So James has asked, can we assure that if someone is receiving CPP disability, for example, and is also receiving ODSP, that this Canada Disability Benefit will be on top? And so we don't have that assurance yet. However, it's similar in terms of ensuring there are no clawbacks. And we're going to need to push in the regulations and in the negotiations with provinces and territories that is affirmed. And that those agreements you will have access to. And you'll be able to hold political folks accountable to the decisions they make at all levels of government for us to push for no clawbacks. Because a person with a disability already living in poverty needs to know that this is going to lift them up and not bring them down. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Thanks for the
So
question.
thank you. Next up, we have Anthony. So Anthony is going to be signing, I believe. I'm gonna make him. Here we go.
Perfect. Yes. Hi, Mike. Good to see you again. We're in the same city. Great. So I'm really impressed with the advocacy that you've done to date regarding the Canada Disability Benefit. And yes, the work does continue. Now, for us in the deaf community across Canada, the thing is English, with the public document being available, it's still going to be in English or French, which we may not have. Not everybody will have the literacy to be able to access that document. So I'm wondering if there will be interpretation into sign. For example, the breakdown of how, if someone's receiving, let's say, ODSP here in Ontario, currently, when you have employment income, there's changes that's calculated with your ODSP, and that's not available in sign language for someone to understand. So oftentimes people don't understand that. So when it comes to this new benefit, I'm hoping that there will be plans to have that available in signed languages so that that public document or those public documents will be made available to our deaf community, that they're accessible so that they can understand exactly what that document is trying to explain.
Anthony, great to see you again and to be with you here. Thank you for the question. It raises for me the importance of having conversations like this to be amplifying what I'm hearing. So I've seen some progress. For example, the committee of MPs that debated the bill had sign interpretation at that event. And that was the only committee that was the case for. So I see the government of Canada attempting to increase accessibility. And you're raising an excellent point that I will bring forward to ask and put pressure to ensure that that accessibility is also in place when it comes to written documentation. I don't have the answer to the question, but informed by you, I'll push for that.
Thank you, Anthony.
Anthony speaking, absolutely. And please do keep in touch. I'd be happy to meet in person to discuss any other improvements that we can make together to ensure that things are accessible to the deaf community. We don't want to see people misunderstanding and not knowing what their rights are. So if that, and that's something I am happy to share as part of Deaf Canada grassroots movement. We are always creating videos for our deaf Canadians to ensure that they're staying informed. So I'm happy to work with you on that. Thank you.
Thanks for what you do, Anthony. Thank you. We'll do one more, I think, online, and then we'll switch.
So we just have a few that came in through the chat, Mike. And a lot of them sort of are around the same topic, and that is of sort of eligibility and clawbacks. And we have different groups. So we have CPP, we have the deaf community, we have people receiving passport funding. So I think, I mean, I know you've already said it, but maybe again, some words of assurance that the goal is to not have clawbacks for those who are currently receiving some sort of assistance. I think that seems to be a trending topic for sure.
So I appreciate hearing the same point from multiple people, because it gives me that assurance that that's where my advocacy needs to remain. So thanks for multiple people bringing that up. But it also lets us talk about eligibility, which I haven't mentioned specifically yet. So there is the question, first of all, to ensure that nothing is clawed back. But there's the other question of who will be eligible for the benefit. And so this is another decision that will be made in the regulations. Two things you should be aware of, though, is that number one, another improvement that we were able to secure is adding the definition of disability to the law. Why that's important is that disability advocates, long before I was elected, ensured that there was a very wide encompassing definition of disability put into the Accessible Canada Act. And thanks to their work in their advocacy on the Accessible Canada Act, we were able to say, please use that same definition that people with disabilities already fought for. So people with episodic disabilities, for example, are included in that definition of disability. Now that that definition is added to this bill, it gives us a better chance that when they talk about eligibility, that it'll be as widely encompassing of that broad definition of disability. However, it reinforces that point for you all to be watching for updates from the organizations that you're already connected with, like KW Accessibility, because when we go through this regulatory process, they are now required to include you in it. And my office will be sharing with organizations like Extended Family and KW Accessibility and ILWR and Christian Horizons so that you're aware of those opportunities and that your voices continue to be heard when this decision about eligibility is made in that regulatory process over the next year.
Mike, this is Jay also phoning or involved. You need to have access to a telephone number for people who don't have computers.
Great point. We can ensure, I have Roz from my team, Jay, who's on this conversation with us. She can put it in the chat if you're connected through the chat. If
I'm not.
Okay.
No, I need landline phone numbers.
Yeah, I will get you a landline phone number momentarily. I believe it is 519-741-2001. That's the landline number for my office. And if you had questions, we can set up a follow-up conversation by phone if you'd like, Jay.
I'll call you in about 10 minutes after the meeting.
I guarantee you.
Perfect. We're lucky enough, I believe, to have a volunteer there who can take that call, and that person can set some time up for that, Jay. I appreciate a man of action. Can we shift a question, I think, right here in the front?
This question's for you, and I just believe for the whole community.
My name is Sarah.
Sarah says, when I look for work, I'm always facing discrimination. We don't need disabled people working here. She's always frustrated.
So a point from Cheryl. Sarah. Sorry, Sarah. I didn't hear correctly. So Sarah was saying that she's feeling discriminated against when seeking work in our community in Kitchener and in Waterloo region. And so, Sarah, I want you to know that I hear that from many people with disabilities across the country, the discrimination that people with disabilities continue to experience, both in seeking work and in the workplace. One thing that the Government of Canada is doing on this is they're putting in place a strategy to better support and address the discrimination that people with disabilities are facing in the workplace. So while the disability benefit is meant as an income support, they're also attempting to address some of this in this workplace strategy. And if you have contact information, I can have a member of my team send you more details, and maybe we could send it to the whole group on what stage that strategy is at and where you can give input to it so that your voice is heard as they develop roles that the federal government can
It's
have to
it's
better
not
address the
fair.
discrimination.
Everybody can work. Why can't we work?
Sarah just shared pretty emotionally how it's not fair that others can work, why can't we? And of course, Sarah, the answer is that you can and you should. And it's actually discrimination that is being applied by others. And I believe that the federal government has a role to play to reduce that discrimination. And I'm sorry that that is the reality of your experience in our community today. That tells me that we as a community aren't doing good enough. And we as a community need to do better for you and for every person with a disability in our community. Thanks for being so candid.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I see that Chantel has another question.
Hi, I'm not a senior yet, but someday I hope to be. And I've heard that because the Ontario Disability Support Program only applies to 19 to 64-year-olds, sometimes disabled seniors can be at an even greater disadvantage than disabled adults, let's say. And so I'm wondering if there are age parameters already set around the Canada Disability Benefit, or if we can do things to improve those.
Chantal, you're so right. Poverty doesn't disappear when a person turns 65, and neither does that person's disability. And so neither should the Canada Disability Benefit. Unfortunately, this is one of the limitations with what is being put forward in this legislation. The way federal politics works is the party who wins the most seats is the one who proposes the legislation. MPs like myself can then suggest improvements. Because of the number of people with disabilities across the country who pushed for the disability benefit not to end at 65, I attempted to bring an amendment that would have removed the limitation that it would end at 65. Unfortunately, it wasn't debated because the law was proposed by the governing party as it was, and it was seen as outside of the scope of what was being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
I want you to know that we know that 10% of people with disabilities all over the age of 65 are living in poverty. And so this means that the disability benefit won't be enough on its own, that the guaranteed income supplement and old age security are insufficient. And when we win the Canada Disability Benefit, we're going to then continue to push for it to be extended to seniors, to Canadians over the age of 65.
I think that's going to be an even harder fight just because the margin of seniors with disabilities is even greater than the margin of younger Canadians with disabilities.
And we're going to need to demonstrate that we're hearing them and that they matter too. And that we're going to need to convince enough other political parties and representatives to stand up for them too. Because
Agreed.
no person with a disability should be living in poverty in this country, as we know. And the way that the disability community has fought for and won the disability benefit, we can see the next struggle right there in front of us. And we're going to need to continue to advocate there too. I appreciate you answering it because it helps us identify what will change with the disability benefit and what we're going to still need to fight for. Can we shift again, Sherry, we have a few more questions in the room before going back online again?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, Amanda from KWA. I don't know that this is a question that you might be able to answer right now due to regulatory, but a lot of the times when we look at the disabled community, we're looking at individuals. Now, for a disabled mom, for example, and a family, when you have two able-bodied individuals working, even that is not enough. And I know that there is, even though ODSP has increased the amount for what you're able to make while receiving, my understanding is that if you have a spouse and a secondary income, that level is still $200 based on their earnings.
Yeah.
So has it been looked at from a point of view where there may also be dependents, not just the disabled individual?
It's a really good question. So Amanda is asking, when we consider who will be eligible and at what amounts, is it the income of the person with a disability? Or is it also that person's dependents, caregivers, and other family members? You're right, Amanda. This will be also decided in the regulations. I had proposed an amendment that would have limited it to looking at the person's income as an individual. The people I had heard from the disability community were advocating for that. Other members of the committee put forward that they felt that, well, they had heard from others that were concerned with that approach and wanted it to be from more than one person in a household. And so for that reason, they committed to continue to get input on this question and to decide it in the regulations. So hearing from you helps me, Amanda, because it reinforces, I think, behind the question, your interest would be ensuring that you aren't limited by the income of other people in your household. Correct. And that if you have dependents, that should maybe increase the amount, but not be decreased by other outside income from your own, right? So thank you for that. It's going to help me continue to make this case because we weren't able to win that in the legal side of it or in the law. We can then push for it in the regulations. Great question.
Perfect. I think next we have Kimberly Wood. So I'm just going to spotlight Kimberly here.
Hi there. My name's Kimberly. I am the founder of the Canadian Deaf Grassroots Movement. And I have been involved in many different meetings with a whole bunch of different people, those who are deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing, and I have heard them and their concerns. And I agree what you're saying now, that in Ontario ODSP, if those people who get ODSP also get this new benefit, then there should be no clawback. And that that money that they're receiving cannot be impacted. In BC, it's called the PWD. And the federal government has the authority over all the provinces about this disability benefit, but we don't want them to claw back our money. And if we are already on ODSP, we want that amount left as it is and not clawed back at all. Can we do that? Is that something we can ensure? My second question is, a big worry of us in regards to the Liberal government is that the Liberals are watching and they are in talks right now, and you know they're in a hurry and they just want to pass all the bills as fast as possible. And so we're just wondering what's going to happen with does the federal government have the power to demand that the provinces can't claw that amount back before the next election? So I'm here speaking on behalf of the community, deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing. That is my question. Thank you.
Kimberly, thanks for the excellent question, and thanks for the grassroots advocacy that you've been doing to help ensure that voices from the deaf community are part of this conversation, and that this improvement is informed by your experience. I will continue to advocate for there to be no clawbacks whatsoever. This conversation today is only reinforcing for me how important that is, hearing from so many in person and online with your concerns. And I know also in many cases how trust has been broken with various levels of government with the disability community, that things have been promised and then not followed through on. And so I recognize that that has you feeling likely less confident that this would be the case here. And that's why having your participation in the regulatory process will be so important, so that this point continues to be made and that we hold them accountable to the promise they've made to not claw back. Unfortunately, the federal government can't unilaterally make that decision. And we're going to need them to negotiate well with all provinces and territories to get that commitment from them. We have examples of this with childcare most recently, where it might be unique to each province and territory, but there are some elements that are consistent. No clawbacks is an example of what we need to ensure is consistent.
Perfect. Is that good, Kimberly? Yep, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Mike, do you have any questions? So we can go till about 1:15. So we've got about 20 minutes left. So if there's any more questions in person, otherwise we have quite a few online and a lot in the chat.
We have two in person from two folks who've asked one already, but have been waiting for some time. Can we go to one here and then back online?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Ron?
Just a quick clarification. You talked about advocating for funding for the disability benefit of the budget, but you also said that, of course, this hasn't passed the Senate or the regulations yet. So in a way, it seems sort of counterintuitive to be able to fund something in a budget that hasn't passed the Senate or the regulations. Are you saying it's possible in principle?
Yes. So Ron's bringing up a great point. Ron just finished sharing. Wait a second, you said the law hasn't passed, the bill hasn't passed through the Senate yet, but then you also said to push for them to fund it. Wouldn't one have to happen before the other? The answer to the question is we need to push for all of the things to happen as quickly as possible. Using childcare as an example again, they committed to funding, they being the federal government, before they put forward the legislation. So we've seen them do the inverse. We don't want to let them off the hook in any circumstance. The bill itself doesn't specify a dollar amount. That's also going to be part of the regulations. It doesn't even specify, it only says that the official poverty line will be considered. It doesn't even guarantee us that it'll go above the official poverty line. So one of the advantages to pushing for it to be funded gives us a dollar amount for the federal government to put on the table when they negotiate with provinces and territories, which the disability community, and I would agree, feel across the country feels would strengthen the negotiating position. That's why this call to fund the benefit is so important. And it's something that they've not committed to in this year's budget. This year's budget, last year, the budget came out the first week of April. So we don't know when it's going to come out, but it's in the coming weeks more than likely. So the timing is really good for the disability community to call for this in budget 2023. The governing party, the Liberals, could do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. So Wayne has had his hand up for some time. Wayne, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll go as quick as I can. Again, thank you, Mike. The work you do is incredible. We really appreciate you. You know, we would be lost without you. Despite all the great efforts, sometimes I feel like we're a little bit of a ripple in the water as opposed to a tidal wave. And my question to you is, within legal confounds and obviously respect for one another and the willingness to openly dialogue, would you consider, or do you think that it's worthwhile that we consider some more different tactics in terms of putting pressure on politicians? Like, for example, showing up at their offices, getting the media involved, just really showing that our voice is strong and will be heard. You know, I just think if we were on the news every other night, it'd be really hard for anyone to really make a strong case against what we're trying to do here. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, thanks for your kind words, Wayne, and for being with us today. My view is that you are a tidal wave, that the disability community is getting its message across. I can even give you a small example. When I put something up on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, for example, it is when I post about the Canada Disability Benefit that it gets shared more widely than I think pretty much anything else. And it's organizations like Disability Without Poverty that are bringing together a national movement. And that's so important when there's a letter writing campaign getting started by a national organization so that MPs, all 338, hear about the concerns and the priorities of the disability community. And so I want you to know that while there's a lot of work still to do, that the voices of the disability community are powerful. In terms of what every person with a disability and their allies can continue to do in terms of raising the profile of your interests, whether it's the Canada Disability Benefit, workplace discrimination, as Sarah was sharing, or any other topic. Personally, I believe in the power of our democracy. Every single MP is first and foremost accountable to their constituents. And so I would encourage you to share with friends of yours, to reach out to your MP directly. That can start with a letter in the mail or an email, or as Jay was sharing, with a phone call, to speak about your experience and what specifically you want them to do. And then to ask for a conversation, to meet with that person, for that person to understand from you why this is so important and how many other people feel the same way. That's how we win legislative change in this country. It's that when an elected person realizes that there are hundreds of people in their constituency who want them to take action on a particular topic, which is again why groups like Disability Without Poverty are so important, to help make it easy for more people to act. It's why I'm so encouraged by this conversation. The number of people are with us this afternoon to affirm how important this is. And so please continue to reach out to and let allies and friends of yours know how important it is to reach out with specific calls to action, like funding the disability benefit in budget 2023.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So I'm going to ask a question from the chat, and then we'll go to an in-person, just because we have a few sort of piling up here. So I don't know if you answered this one earlier. So are they working on the regulations now, or are they waiting until the law is passed? That was a question. And then sort of in conjunction with that, if we don't have a set amount set, and you're talking about potentially passing in 2023's budget, how would they figure out the amount to pass in the budget if we don't know the amount yet?
Great question. Let me summarize the steps. One step that's already completed is the bill has passed the elected House of Commons unanimously. The next step is it needs to pass the unelected Senate. I'm hoping that might happen within the next month or two. Once the bill passes the Senate, it becomes law, and then the regulation process begins. That's the process I mentioned could take up to, but no more than 1 year. And then we would then ideally have a disability benefit that would be in place, that would be accessible. So it's possible for the Canada Disability Benefit to be in place as soon as spring of 2024. But we're going to need to advocate for that timeline to be followed. In terms of the question on funding, while we don't know the amounts yet, we do know that having the federal government commit money in the budget will strengthen their ability to negotiate agreements with provinces and territories across the country. And so while they might not know exactly the cost because they don't know who's eligible and how much it's going to be, we can advocate for them to put a base amount in this year's budget. They may need to add more next year's budget depending on decisions that are made in regulations. But we know in the past, they've done this. When something is a priority, governments put it in their budgets because budgets reflect our priorities. So for every elected person who says the words that they want to prioritize lifting people with disabilities out of poverty, we should be telling them to show that by advocating it to be funded, for the disability benefit to be funded in this year's budget.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. So did you have a question in person there?
We do, if that's, yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. As you know, there's the issue with the provincial government here in Ontario. They held back on ODSP and they say, oh, here's much money. But they're making havoc with our medical side. Now let's talk about the federal. PC known provincial, progressive conservative is known to create a bit of a habit. What chances of them repealing this law?
It was James, right?
Yeah, James.
So James asking an important question. He asked, what's the chance that another party, should they get the most seats, could they then repeal the Canada Disability Benefit? And he shared his concern and disappointment with the current governing party provincially. It's a great question, James, and it's the benefit of having legislation. It's much more difficult to repeal a law than it is to change a budget. Unfortunately, the dollar amount isn't in the law. And that's one of the limitations.
That's why the provincial government has been held back.
So James is sharing this is why provincially ODSP has been held back. So it's a good point. One of the limitations of the Disability Benefit Act is the dollar amount isn't in it. Here's what we did get done though. One of the issues for folks in Ontario is that ODSP isn't indexed to inflation. And so that has allowed ODSP to become worse and worse over the recent years. And it's allowed some governments to pretend that increasing 5%, as they did this year, should be celebrated, despite inflation being 8%, and in fact, that being a 3% cut. So what we did with the Canada Disability Benefit, I proposed an amendment to index it to inflation. Whatever the amount is, can we guarantee in the law that it'll be indexed to inflation? Because disability advocates have called for that. It passed unanimously. And so we have a guarantee that whatever the amount is, it will be indexed to inflation federally. And because there's legislation, it'll be more difficult to repeal. The other benefit we have is that all parties voted in support. And in fact, even parties that some folks might feel might have been less supportive. You mentioned the Conservative Party. I can tell you they even introduced helpful amendments at committee. And so, despite what I think can be very toxic partisanship in Ottawa, I'm hopeful that every political party, while some might not advocate, some parties might not be the ones who would have pushed for this to happen. My hope is, and I don't want to overly set your expectation, but that we have some evidence of their support in this process, and we do have legislation.
Okay, so Mike, we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get Rosalind to pop your email again in the chat. So if somebody who has their hand up or has a question and doesn't get a chance to ask it, they can shoot you an email afterwards, if that's okay. That way we can get everyone's through as many people as possible. So Fazia, I'm going to make you bigger here. There we go. Perfect.
Hi, my name is Fazia. What I'm really concerned for people with disabilities here, you mentioned before about this benefit would go up until you're 65, but ODSP also stops at that age. So what happens after that for seniors who have disabilities if they don't have CPP, ODSP, disability tax, this particular benefit? How were they supposed to survive financially in our economy?
Fazia, thank you for the questions. It's one of my disappointments with the Canada Disability Benefit is that seniors with disabilities who are living in poverty will not be lifted up by the Canada Disability Benefit. However, a senior will still have access to 2 important federal supports. They're insufficient, but those supports are old age security and the guaranteed income supplement. And folks like myself and others pushed the minister to recognize that when you add up those 2 supports, it doesn't add up to enough to raise above the poverty line. So they haven't done their job. However, we weren't successful, and the disability benefit will still end at 65, unfortunately. And so we're going to need to continue to press on this. And I appreciate you raising it, because every senior with a disability in my community and in communities across the country won't be lifted up at this really important time. And things are only getting worse as the cost of living goes up too. I'm sorry we weren't able to win that improvement. And I could say, if it upsets you the same way it does me, one of the ways we have our voices heard is at election time. And encourage you to engage both in between elections, the way we are now, to improve legislation and to push for things to be funded, but also at election time, so that we have we need 170 out of 338 to vote in support. We don't have that right now. And the way we would improve that is in some ways at election time.
All right. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Fazia. Sorry, I'm gonna kind of rush us through the next 2 because we have 2 questions left online. And then Mike, I know you have a little bit of time. Potentially you can connect with some folks in person there, just because I have to close out the meeting at 2:15. So Myron, I'm going to make you big here. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Hi. My question, I put it in the chat because I wasn't sure I was going to get a chance, is who's going to write the regulations? And it might take, and it might take more, no, it won't take more time because it has to take only a year. A citizens assembly has been used in a number of areas overseas, in Europe and Ireland, for example, and we're promoting it in Canada for some other issues. Who's going to write the regulations? And I would suggest the Citizens Assembly.
Myron, thanks for your continued advocacy. I want you to know your calls for a Citizens Assembly are well heard. And in fact, I put forward a motion to call for a Citizens Assembly for electoral reform, because we need to be ensuring that every person's voice, every vote should count. And right now, the way we elect people, that's not the case. When it comes to regulations, they'll be written by the public service. And specifically, it's ESDC, which I believe stands for Employment Service Development Canada. But really, they'll be written by the disability community, because we've ensured that the disability community, the words in the law are that it will be meaningful and barrier-free engagement in the regulatory process. And so this won't be the last conversation we have about this. I think it's so important for those of you who are interested and able to be a part of that regulatory process over the next year. Because as we're talking about today, so many of the most important decisions, how much is it, who is going to be eligible, are all left to these regulations. And so I can appreciate for many of you, you might be feeling like, well, there's a lot of work still to do. And the fact is that that's true. And we're going to need your participation in that process to ensure that the regulations are designed in a way that meets the needs and expectations of the disability community.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Myron, for your question. So far we have, it looks like one last question from Andy. Andy, did you want to go ahead and ask your question? You're on mute right now. And perhaps Andy's gone away from the screen. Was there any other questions from the audience? We have 2 minutes left.
Okay. Secure. Yeah.
Sorry, I was hearing something, but it wasn't clear.
3:30. Want a real call? Want a snack? No, I'm good. Sardine sandwiches? I'm good.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That might just be someone's mic on. I'm sorry about that. But if there's no other questions at this, oh, is there one there, Mike? Sorry.
Well, Edward would like to have a word, I think.
Sure.
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to thank Mike for coming out today and his team for making this possible. And also the other agencies like ILWR and CHS and all the other agencies that all work together. This is such an important topic to all of us. And what I really got out of this today is that we all see the world through our own eyes. And there's some points that are important to me that might not be important to other people, and other issues that other people have that I wouldn't even have thought of. And the only way that we can make the world a better place is for all of us to get together at meetings like this with somebody like Mike, who's willing to stand up and say this is wrong. So I'd like to thank Mike and his team, but I'd also like to thank everybody for joining us today, because we could host this meeting and Mike could do all this, but if we don't bring his input, then he's not going to know what the issues are that really affect us. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Sherry and ILWR for doing the video today. And thank you again, everybody, for your points and raising these really important topics. We're going to have contact information. You can contact us, or I'm sure Sherry will have it and Amanda will have it. So however you found out about this meeting, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll make sure that Mike gets the information, and we look forward to working together to improve the situation. So thank you so much.
Edward, thank you. And if I could share, I feel like I can be a better advocate having been a part of a conversation like this. This is how our democracy is supposed to work. Hearing from your lived experiences to try to then be a voice for those things in our parliament is actually my job. But I can only do that job if you make the time to, and trust for me to attempt to do that. Not that we're going to get every win, but we're going to fight. And I feel like we can do that better with you, with us. And so I really appreciate you, Edward, and Sherry. This was an idea that came from you both. And so this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you both. I also really appreciate you having sign interpretations throughout. And so Amina and Lisa, thank you to you both again for ensuring this is as accessible as possible. And for the technology required to do online and in person. This is one of the most impressive online and in-person hybrid events I've ever been a part of. And that's really a testament to all the work that you all put in to make this possible. So thank you. And also 2 members of my team are here. Both Dawn and Roz are with us. And while a lot of folks have said thank you to me, you have to all know that this is a whole office that does this work. And I'm proud to be the person who's got a seat in the House of Commons, but it's a whole team of people. And Dawn is the lead of our community office, that leads our work here. Roz does all of our communications. So anything you've seen from me online or on paper, that's Roz and her team's work, and Dawn too. So thank you both for being here. Al from Extend a Family, again, thanks for the advocacy that you've done, sending written briefs into committee. The strength of I guess I'm a bit biased, but I think our community in Waterloo Region, particularly the disability community, the way there's so much collaboration between the agencies to pull off something like this is really impressive. So thank you again.
Yeah, well done, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mike. I have to hop off, so I'm going to be ending the call. That means you're all going to disappear, but thank you all so much. All right.
Sherry? Oh,
yes.
Sherry, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Amanda. Can I sneak in 1 second and just see if we do have any participants at KWA in person who are deaf? Because if you close the call, we will lose our interpreting.
Sarah?
Like deaf needing an ASL interpreter.
I think we recognize the limitations of our time with ASL interpreters, and so we'll have to manage without their support for the rest of our conversation. We really appreciate, again, the ASL interpretation provided this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Just
Thanks,
wanted to check.
everybody. Okay, bye now.